Hello there, eager Shakespeare student. This is your professor again, Michael Martin, giving you a short setup of Richard III. By now, we've started the third week of the semester. You've had a major assignment due, that is the essay. You've had a quiz, you've had discussion boards. I hope the course is settling in for you, and I hope it's going well, and that your summer's going well. So, for this one, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Richard, tell you a little bit about his machinations in terms of anticipating the second post of the week to this weekend, um, and kind of give you a general setup for what you can expect. So, from Much Ado About Nothing, which was set in Messina, Italy, we've now switched back to England and to London specifically. We have the Tower of London, the dreaded Tower of London, as a recurring place here. And the shift is, Shakespeare used Italian sources for many of his plays, so no wonder he had Much Ado About Nothing set there. But this one is in London. It's also on a field that's away from London, but otherwise we're in the epicenter of Shakespeare's world as a writer, where he did practice and he did participate in plays away from his wife. So that being said, I also chose this play because it's only an 8-week semester. I'm not trying to overwhelm you. We have four main plays. We've read a comedy. Now we need to read a history. Shakespeare wrote several Henry IV, Henry V plays, and a Richard II play. And if you can kind of think about this for a second, Richard III, the one you're reading for this week, actually kind of culminates an entire large cycle of histories. I've read a few of the histories. They're long, they're about wars, and they have lots of kind of battles. Women are won in battles. Anyway, you kind of get that with Richard III. But Richard III is the culmination of all those histories, including Henry IV, which may be the best of them. And I chose Richard III because not only is it a representative of that genre, of a history one, right? We're going to switch to romance at the end. We're also going to have one of his tragedies next week with Othello. I showed this one simply to give you a range and depth of Shakespeare's genres within the plays. And I think you're going to, I don't know if the word is enjoy, you're certainly going to find parallels with Shakespeare's villains, and it's something you can contemplate for your post this week if you chose that option. And Richard III, who is a villain upon all villains. He uses death, he usurps power, he manipulates women, you name it. He kills children with not infanticide, but of his own blood. So there's this sense that he is as malevolent as it gets, though I'll let you look at Iago with Othello. Once we get to that, that's our next play for next week. You're going to enjoy that one as well. So in terms of introductory concepts, in terms of what you need to be looking for, if you want to know the history, we're talking about the English War of the Roses and the York line that Richard is a part of. So we're going to get a little bit of that. We're going to get the end of the War of the Roses at the end of our play. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but just remember that Shakespeare does generally have comeuppance in his world. He has characters who get karmic retribution for their wrongs, largely speaking, not entirely in Shakespeare's plays. But if we're thinking about Richard as a character, and maybe as dreaded as I've set him up to be for you as a reader, I'm presuming you haven't read Richard III yet. The idea is he is maybe humanized a little. I mean, when I say a little to us in Act 1, Scene 1. Once again, this is a 5-act play, just like Much Ado About Nothing. That seemingly is Shakespeare's larger. He usually has 5 acts for some of his plays at least. But if we look back, and I'm going to try to pull this up, so bear with me as I'm talking to you. He starts off, I can just tell you, now is the winter of our discontent, is one of his opening lines. And he's talking about the rise of the York line and his brother rising to power as king. Right, this is the York-Lancaster line. The two lines are battling one another, the War of the Roses. And he's now become in power. But if there's something that's interesting about him, is he references deformity. Now, I don't want to say this is deformity the same as disability in your mind? He calls it a deformity he has a self-loathing quality. In this opening soliloquy, in the opening part of Act One, Scene One, we see him already thinking about how he can usurp his brother's power. We see him contemplating his physical deformities. He apparently has a hunchback or something like that, and he seemingly maybe that explains why he doesn't think he's been looked upon kindly from the world. He hasn't been treated well. He has People look past him. He's unmarried at this point, from the best of my knowledge. He doesn't have a wife. So there are lots of reasons why we can look at Richard as someone who maybe is a sympathetic character here. But even if he's happy, even if he's content, we know that he's going to imprison his brother Clarence, and we know that he's going to have multiple people killed. Most of the time, he doesn't do the killing. He has other people who does the killing. So this is not someone who I'm suggesting is sympathetic by any means in terms of the majority of the play. I'd also note, just as a side note, if you like Game of Thrones, I can't help but finding lots of references that seemingly Game of Thrones use, whether that's Martin's writing of the novels, of the Fire and Ice novels, or with the actual screenwriters, the American screenwriters, the two R's, I think, whose name escapes me. You get fratricide, you get people killing children, you get a lust for power, you even get Tyrell. There's lots of reasons why this is seemingly a Game of Thrones, inspires Game of Thrones. But what I wanted to mention about our guy, Richard, right? If he's kind of the puppet master behind the scenes of action, causing people to do things, and one of the things that I ask you about for this weekend, if you have two options to choose from, by the way, for your post, is how we're supposed to view the female characters in Richard III. And the first one we get, well, we'll also get Queen Elizabeth, and the first one we get would be Lady Anne. And if you're catching up for a second, let me pull up the scene just for a moment. He's having a long discussion with Lady Anne in Act 1, Scene 2, right? And Lady Anne is doing traditional mourning for her husband, Prince Edward, and she says, first six lines, set down, your honorable load. If honor may be shrouded in a hearse, right? Hearse for carrying the dead. While I away obsequiously lament the untimely fall of virtuous Lancaster, poor key-cold figure of a holy king, pale ashes of the house of Lancaster, thou bloodless remnant of that blood, be it lawful that I invocate thy ghost to hear the lamentations of poor Anne, wife to thy Edward, to thy slaughtered son. She is giving a eulogy, a private one, for her father-in-law, whom Richard also had killed, right? So he's killed her husband, Prince Edward. He's killed, right? And he's killed the father-in-law. And she's suggesting that he deserves much more than her solitary, unviewed lament for him. And she's trying to give a burial right to the dead. This play, unlike Much Ado About Nothing, has action immediately. It has death, it has lamentation, it has verbal sparring, like we got with Beatrice and Benedict, immediately. And this scene is one I want you to focus on as you read. Specifically, she comes in rightly with barbed words towards Richard as the person who killed the two men in her life. But he manipulates her, and this is what to look for, into marrying him. He's going to ditch her later on for a younger cousin Elizabeth of someone else he's going to kill. Yeah, I know. But the idea is, I want you, look, I'm much more interested if you choose this option in your thoughts, but to be a little sympathetic towards this woman. We live in Elizabethan England. We can't expect there to be complete equal rights towards women. And she is being courted by someone going into power and with money and who can make her world better. Women as a commodity, unfortunately, in many respects in this world, though Shakespeare does have strong women in his work. They're not all victims. But she's going to transition into accepting his hand in marriage by the end of this this section, and there's a witty verbal jarring, and she goes in, she talks about his soul at the end, and the idea that like, I hope I can believe your soul. And he says he killed for the love of her. So he's using manipulation in a very purposeful way, and using emotional manipulation for a mourning woman, in a way that I think can't separate context from action. And certainly he plays the part of the wooing lover at a funeral dirge for her father-in-law. So it's a strange way of looking at it. Maybe you'll view Lady Anne more harshly than I do. And notice she said in that monologue I just read more than, excuse me, that soliloquy she just read. Soliloquy is when they're alone on the stage. Monologue is when someone's just speaking, but there's someone there in terms of context. Notice she mentions ghosts, and I want you to be looking in Act 4, Act 5, for any ghosts that may appear. And I think there's maybe a little bit of foreshadowing going on there. I think you'll enjoy the end of the play, is what I'm trying to get to. It's a long play. I hope it goes well. I have one last thing to mention for you, to you, and to think about with you. So if we go to, it's Act 3, Scene 1 or 2. I'll pull it up in a second. You're maybe using the online Folger edition that I'm providing a hyperlink to. I also use the MIT.edu. If you just Google Richard III MIT, you get quickly to scenes, and you can actually read scenes. It's easier to read. It's not as pretty with font and with secondary material as the Folger site. But this one, in Act 3, Scene 2, let me pull it up, make sure I'm in the right act. It's Richard is speaking with Buckingham, and with, I apologize, he's speaking with a couple people, and Prince Edward appears. Sorry about that, I got my scenes mixed up. Buckingham and Gloucester are walking with Prince Edward, whose brother, that he's young, he's an Edward, he's next in line to the throne, and he's basically being told, again, it's done through machinations. I do not like the tower of any place. Did Julius Caesar build that place, my lord? And Gloucester had asked him to go on the tower for, quote, for your best health and recreation. Repose you at the tower. If someone asks you to go into the Tower of London for health and recreation, for goodness sake, don't go, right? I want to shout at this young man. He's not a dumb, he's smart. I don't know why. He thinks it's for his protection, but it's also going to set up a place where in Act 4, Scene 2, he will be killed along with his brother. And that's more bloodline dead. That leads to Richard's ascending the throne. And there's this idea that there's a self-awareness of the character yet leading to his own fate. And I don't quite understand that, but he's a child. He's not allowed to question. And Buckingham is going to do Richard's bidding until Richard takes him into an even darker place. That is, the killing of these children. So we've got that. You could see the dominoes being set in place for Richard in terms of who he has to kill in order to ascend to the throne. Watch it. Watch his machinations. Watch the way he manipulates people, including with the Lady Anne episode, including with his henchmen, including with Queen Elizabeth. And if you get confused about names, who's whom, who's Catesby, who are all these people coming in, you may want to have a character list in front of you, but just think they're mainly lords of houses either loyal to the York line or against it. And so there's a sense that you could see Gloucester and Buckingham as being loyal. Heck, you could see Hastings as being loyal, but poor Hastings, well, you'll see. There's this idea that you try not to be confused with the characters coming in and out. Just figure out with whom they are aligned, including the power. And I'll probably ask this in the quiz for next week. Who's going to be Richard's antagonist who will eventually beat him on the field? So figure out whether you're aligned with that person or aligned with Richard. And at that point, I will bid you adieu. Good luck reading Richard III. Bye.